Imagine you are a junior crew member on a massive ocean, right? And you're out there in the dark and you intercept a desperate distress signal
Right.
and you're doing the right thing. You're following maritime law, you're following your own moral compass. You arrive at the coordinates to help out, only to find you haven't boarded a ship in need. You've walked directly into a stomach.
It is, it's really the ultimate subversion of our most basic human instincts.
Hmm.
I mean, evolution and society have completely wired us to respond to a cry for help.
Exactly.
It's what keeps communities alive. But in this scenario, that very empathy, the absolute best part of your humanity, is the exact mechanism of your own consumption.
Man, that is just that terrifying realization brings us to the mission of today's deep dive into the source material. Because to figure this out, you, the listener, sent us an incredible, massive stack of documents.
Really dense stack, yeah.
Yeah, so we are looking at the raw audio transcripts from a chilling video by the YouTube channel, The Midnight Curator. It's titled, "We Boarded an Empty Ship. It Wasn't Empty." But we don't just have the narrative logs. We have all these supplementary materials appended to it. We've got maritime hazard protocol manuals, extremely dense theoretical physics papers on spatial anomalies, and this is the crazy part, several highly detailed animated diagrams of predatory biology and cyclical flowcharts of an impossible machine.
Which is exactly what we need to decode this half
Yeah.
story. Because this isn't just a ghost story. It's a fascinating, um, really rigorous study of what happens when a physical environment, in this case, a massive, thousands of tons steel cargo vessel, functions as a living predatory organism.
Yeah, a literal monster.
But exactly. It's a deep exploration of architectural mimicry and biological traps operating on a massive, almost incomprehensible scale.
I have to say, I am unnerved by this. I will admit that up front. But I am fiercely curious to figure out exactly how this thing works, because looking through these sources, the mechanics of the trap are completely mind-bending.
Oh, absolutely.
But before we can even begin to understand how the trap is sprung, I think we have to look at the incredibly unnatural conditions that lured the prey in the first place.
We do. We have to set the stage.
Right, because according to the audio logs on page 1 of the transcript, the ocean itself is behaving wrong.
It's at a very specific, highly anomalous stage, yeah.
So the scene is set in deep water, right? In the middle of the night. And the narrator points out something that anyone who has ever been on a boat knows: the ocean is never truly silent.
Never.
But on this particular night, the log notes a total, absolute absence of kinetic energy. No waves, no rolling swells, zero ambient wind, just an expanse of motionless, dark water stretching out in every direction. The log describes it like a sheet of black glass.
And we have to stop and analyze just how physically impossible that is.
Yeah, please do, because that sounds crazy.
Well, the ocean is a massive, interconnected engine of kinetic energy. You have thermohaline circulation moving water across the globe based on temperature and salinity. You have wind stress creating surface waves. You have lunar tides pulling at the mast.
Right, it's literally always moving.
Always. For a section of deep water to register zero kinetic energy, to become essentially a dead zone of perfect stillness, it implies a localized suppression of the fundamental laws of physics.
So it's not just a quiet night at sea. It's an environment that has been artificially paused.
Precisely. It's as if the environment itself has been deadened by an immense external force. It's an area of effect.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because in the middle of this impossible, mathematically dead ocean, our junior crew member on a nearby ship is drafted into a response effort.
Right, because of the signal.
Yeah, their comms array intercepts a distress signal.
Mm.
And because they are the closest vessel to these remote coordinates under maritime law, they are the default rescue team. They have to go.
They have a legal and moral obligation.
Right. So they approach the coordinates, and emerging from the dark ahead of them is the target. It's a massive commercial cargo vessel. But here is the huge red flag in the logs. Maritime registries have this exact ship listed as missing for several years.
Several years adrift.
Yes. And it's just sitting silent on the water, heavily shadowed, no exterior lighting, no communication signals coming back to them, just the automated distress beacon looping over and over.
And immediately, as they shine their floodlights on the hull, we hit the first major contradiction. The physical state of the ship completely defies its own history.
Yes. The transcript highlights this beautifully. If you leave a steel vessel adrift in the ocean for years, it degrades. The environment eats it.
It's a highly corrosive environment back there.
Exactly. You expect heavy saltwater corrosion, blooming rust trails, structural failure, massive biofouling, barnacles and algae just coating the water line, just general catastrophic neglect.
You expect a wreck.
But the floodlights reveal a ship that is completely pristine. The paint is intact. It appears entirely unweathered. It's gliding through the water as if operating under its own power, but with no living crew on the decks.
It is an anomaly of time.
It really is. It's like finding a pristine, perfectly preserved artifact sitting right in the middle of a desert storm, totally untouched by the sand. It completely defies the chemical process of oxidation.
It does.
But this actually leads me to a major pushback question from you. Looking at the biological diagrams of this predator, why would it want its trap to look pristine?
Well,
Because if the goal is to lure in a rescue team, wouldn't it make far more sense for the trap to look abandoned, battered, on fire, or helpless to really sell the narrative of the distress signal?
you would think so, logically.
Right. If I see a ship that's been missing for 5 years looking like it just rolled out of the dry dock, I'm not going in, I'm calling the military.
But let's consult the Maritime Hazard Protocol manuals included in our source stack, because from a psychological and operational standpoint, pristine perfection is actually a far more effective lure.
Wait, really? How?
Think about how human risk assessment works in high-stress environments. If a rescue crew approaches a heavily damaged, decaying, rusting ship, their hazard protocols immediately engage.
Oh, I see. They treat it like a biological or structural threat.
Exactly. They look at rust and think tetanus or structural collapse. They look at a listing hull and think imminent sinking. They anticipate toxic chemical leaks from degraded cargo containers.
So they go on the defensive.
Yes, consequently, they proceed with extreme methodical caution. They suit up in hazmat gear, they move slowly, or they might even opt to not board at all and just attempt a rapid hit-and-run extraction via helicopter. They are on maximum alert. Their adrenaline is spiking, preparing them for fight or flight.
But a pristine ship changes that math completely.
It rewrites the subconscious narrative. A ship that looks perfectly maintained removes all the visual cues of environmental danger. It contradicts the missing status, certainly, but it replaces the expectation of immediate hazard with an overwhelming sense of mystery and, crucially, false security.
Wow.
It tells the rescuer's subconscious the structure is safe to walk on. It removes the operational urgency and the caution. It functions as a perfect psychological lure because it pacifies the prey before they even cross the threshold.
That is so deeply unsettling. Just think about that for a second. If you, the listener, were the one holding that flashlight, standing on the deck of your own ship, looking at this massive ghost vessel, how much do you rely on normal visual cues to assess danger?
We rely on them entirely.
Right. If a dark alley looks swept and clean, maybe you walk down it. When things look too perfect, our instincts just fail us completely. We forget to be afraid because there's no rust to be afraid of.
We rely on decay to signal the passage of time and the presence of neglect. By presenting a vessel immune to the standard laws of maritime decay, the predator is essentially masking the reality of time. It presents a blank slate.
So their hazard protocols are completely bypassed by this flawless exterior facade. They launch the rigid inflatable boat, they cross the dead water, and they step inside.
And that's when everything changes.
Yeah, because the sensory input they receive next completely betrays the visual safety of the hull. As the rescue team steps over the threshold onto the main deck, the very physics of their environment shift.
The transition begins.
The transcript notes that the moment their boots hit the deck, the atmospheric pressure drops drastically. The air suddenly grows heavy and freezing cold. And beneath them, the solid metal flooring emits these soft, continuous creaking and groaning sounds.
But the text is very specific, and we must be precise here about those sounds. The creaking isn't the ocean pushing against the hull.
Right, because the ocean is dead. There are no waves hitting the ship. The groans are caused by pressure shifting from deep inside the interior of the ship itself.
What's fascinating here is this subversion of mechanical expectations. On a normal maritime vessel, metal fatigue and the groaning of the hull are external reactions. It's the vessel resisting the crushing weight and kinetic energy of the ocean environment.
The waves pounding the steel.
Right. But here, the ship is maintaining a sterile, highly ordered vacuum. The sounds are strictly internal. If we look at this through the lens of the predatory biology diagram, that internal pressure shift isn't mechanical fatigue at all.
It's biological. It's like a massive lung expanding.
Precisely. It implies the ship is drawing breath. Or, more accurately, it is shifting its internal musculature in preparation for what's to come.
Oh, man.
It's a biological predatory function perfectly disguised as a standard, comforting maritime sound. A sailor hears a ship creak, and they feel at home. They don't realize they are listening to digestion preparing itself.
Wow. That is terrifying. And here's where the architectural mimicry reaches its absolute peak. The interior corridors of this ship are immaculate. The rescue team sweeps the upper decks. There are no signs of panic, no damaged bulkheads, no deployed life rafts, no blood.
It's completely sterile.
Yeah, and then they get to the crew quarters, beds are perfectly made, and the detail that really got me, half-eaten meals are sitting out on the dining tables in the galley. It's like the original inhabitants just vanished mid-routine.
The classic Mary Celeste scenario.
Right, exactly. And for you, the listener, who might not be a huge maritime history buff, the Mary Celeste, was that famous American merchant brigantine found adrift in the Atlantic in 1872.
Right, a legendary mystery.
Yeah, the ship was completely intact, cargo untouched, perfectly seaworthy, but the entire crew had completely vanished without a trace, leaving all their belongings behind. That's the exact vibe here. It's like stepping into a spider web that's been specifically designed to look like a warm, cozy living room.
And the source text actually brings up a specific animated diagram to explain this, referring to the anglerfish mechanism.
Yes. The diagram illustrates a deep-sea anglerfish, a hunter that lives in total darkness, using a glowing, enticing bioluminescent lure to draw prey directly into a controlled, fatal environment, its massive jaws.
It's an elegant biological strategy.
So the untouched meals, the perfect beds, they aren't just spooky atmospheric details, they are highly calibrated components of a biological trap.
They serve a very specific psychological function, yes.
They weaponize empathy. The half-eaten meal is specifically designed to make the rescuers think the crew is still aboard, maybe hiding from something, or trapped in a lower bulkhead in need of immediate medical assistance.
Right.
It tells the rescuers, we were just here, come find us.
It absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
The ship maintains this specific brand of vacancy to ensure the rescue team boards and penetrates deeper without hesitation.
It's so calculated.
Let's look at the alternative. If the ship looked like the site of a brutal massacre, blood on the walls, torn metal, no. The team would immediately retreat. They would seal the bulkhead, return to their ship, and call for military backup or quarantine support.
And the predator loses its meal.
Exactly. It's too aggressive.
Right.
By presenting a sterile, highly ordered vacuum with signs of recent interrupted life, the trap ensures the rescue team will continue to search the interior. The logic of the rescuer dictates that survivors must be just around the next corner.
So they keep going.
They're drawn forward not by a physical tether, but by their own psychological compulsion to help.
So the trap was perfectly set, and it was silently waiting. It had the perfect bait, the perfect environment, the perfect psychological profile of its prey. All it needed was the rescue team to willingly walk deeper into the dark.
And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. The pristine silence of the upper decks is suddenly broken by a single auditory cue. From deep within the lightless lower decks, they hear a heavy metallic thud.
The bait is moving.
And seconds later, echoing up the stairwell, a faint, broken human voice calls out for help.
The anglerfish has wiggled its glowing lure. The hook is set.
Yeah, and the physical reality of the descent to follow that voice is incredibly oppressive. The text from the junior crew member's log describes moving down these narrow, steep staircases and the ambient temperature dropping even further with every deck they pass.
The environment is changing around them.
Condensation is dripping heavily down the steel walls. The air is physically thinning, creating this intense, suffocating sense of claustrophobia. It paints such a visceral picture. It doesn't feel like walking down a staircase. It feels like moving down the esophagus of something massive.
But we must notice the specific environmental shifts you just mentioned.
Yeah.
The thinning air, the dropping temperature, the excessive condensation.
Yeah, it's not just spooky atmosphere.
These aren't just atmospheric conditions. They are the physical realities of moving deeper into an environment that fundamentally does not support human biology.
It's rejecting them.
The ship is slowly turning up the hostility of the environment, decreasing the oxygen saturation. But it does so gradually enough that the human drive to rescue the voice supersedes the mammalian instinct to flee the suffocating space.
And at the absolute bottom, at the end of this darkened, wet corridor deep in the bowels of the ship, they find the source of the voice.
The lure itself.
It's a solitary man wearing a faded engineer's jumpsuit, slumped against the wet steel wall, sitting totally motionless. But his physical condition is completely impossible given the context of a ship missing for years.
Explain the contradiction there based on the logs.
There are no lacerations on him, no blunt force trauma. Most importantly, no signs of starvation or dehydration. He looks perfectly healthy.
Which shouldn't be possible.
Right, but his eyes are completely vacant. They don't blink, they don't react to the blinding beams of the tactical flashlights shining right in his face, and across his face is a rigid, wide smile that physically stretches the muscles of his cheeks and jaw beyond natural human limits.
The uncanny valley in its absolute purest form.
Right, the uncanny valley, that feeling of deep psychological revulsion when we see something that looks almost exactly human, but not quite perfect. Our evolutionary biology screams at us that it's a corpse or a disease vector or a predator in disguise.
It triggers our deepest alarms.
So the rescue captain steps up, terrified but holding his ground, and demands to know where the rest of the crew is. And the smiling man doesn't explain. He doesn't ask for water.
No.
He just maintains this unblinking, tearing stare, tilts his head at an unnatural angle, and whispers 2 words, "Still sailing."
A profoundly chilling trigger phrase.
Okay, but this is where I have a major pushback question for you based on the biology diagrams. Because if this ship is a super advanced ancient predator, capable of perfectly mimicking a distress call, controlling atmospheric pressure, and projecting this flawless illusion of safety on the hull,
Yes.
why use this broken, terrifying, uncanny human as the trigger? Why reveal the horror with this smiling guy? Why not just snap the steel trap shut the second they step on the main deck?
That is a brilliant question. And if we look at the evolutionary biology texts provided, the answer lies in the limitations of assimilation.
Okay.
The uncanny valley aspect you mentioned, the unnatural muscle-tearing smile, the utter lack of a blink reflex is the clearest evidence we have of how the ship processes its prey.
What do you mean by processes?
The ship has repurposed a human form to act as bait, but it is fundamentally a vast non-human intelligence. It does not possess empathy, so it doesn't perfectly understand human psychology or biological limits.
Oh, I see.
It is likely calculated that a smile is a human facial expression denoting non-threat or welcome. But it applies that expression with mechanical rigid force, stretching the muscles too far, treating flesh like it treats steel cables.
Like an alien trying to wear a human suit and not quite knowing how the joints work. It knows the shape, but not the soul.
Exactly. It's a facsimile of humanity. As for why it waits to close the trap, the text explicitly calls this man a biological tripwire.
A tripwire.
Think about the sheer scale of the ship. A predator of this magnitude doesn't want its prey near the edges of the upper decks, where they might easily sprint to the edge and dive into the water to escape.
That makes sense. They're too close to the exit.
It uses the voice and then the physical presence of the man to draw the rescue team into the absolute deepest, most heavily armored, inescapable part of the hull.
The metaphorical stomach.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It needs them deep inside the heavy steel framework where the primary structural doors can be sealed and the chemical process of digestion can begin without any interference from the outside world. The tripwire ensures maximum depth before activation.
Wow. It's using our own relentless drive for answers against us. We had to know what was making the voice, and the moment those words, "still sailing," were spoken, the passive facade dropped entirely.
Trap springs.
The trap didn't just close, it came violently alive. According to the transcript, massive, supposedly dead diesel engines roar to life with this heavy, deafening vibration that literally shakes the structural columns of the ship.
The sound must have been overwhelming.
The overhead halogen lights immediately short out, popping in showers of sparks, plunging these already claustrophobic lower decks into total pitch black darkness.
The transition from passive lure to active hostility is instantaneous. The anglerfish has finally turned off its comforting bioluminescent light, and the jaw muscles are snapping shut.
And in the sudden blackout, as the flashlights sweep wildly, they hear dozens of wet footsteps surrounding them. Out of the shadows, identical entities are suddenly flanking the crew in the corridors.
The assimilated crew.
Dozens of men and women in faded uniforms, watching them with the exact same empty, rigid, muscle-tearing smiles as the decoy. The crew panics, obviously. They open fire, which does nothing, and they sprint back toward the stairwells they just came down.
Their fight or flight finally kicks in.
But this is where the transcript introduces a truly mind-bending concept from those physics papers, a spatial anomaly.
This is the moment where the biological and the architectural elements fuse into something deeply terrifying.
Looking at page 4 of the transcript, it references another animated diagram here. It shows standard architectural blueprints of a heavy cargo vessel's hallway. Usually, these are built with rigid, straight lines of reinforced maritime steel, right? specifically designed to maximize structural integrity against ocean waves.
Built to be unyielding.
But as the crew is running, the physical escape route actively mutates around them. The heavy steel framework groans and bends. The straight lines of the hallway begin to warp, and they elongate into impossible twisting geometric dead ends.
If we connect this to the theoretical physics papers and the biology flowcharts, the text explicitly states that this physical manipulation mimics the biological contraction of a predator's digestive tract.
Right, let's explain the mechanics of that, because how does rigid steel bend like that without snapping?
It requires a localized manipulation of molecular bonds. The ship isn't just bending metal, it is softening the steel, treating the bulkheads like smooth muscle tissue.
That is wild.
Think of peristalsis in the human body, the involuntary constriction and relaxation of the muscles of the intestine or the esophagus, creating wave-like movements that push the contents of the canal forward.
So, what does this all mean for the crew? It's exactly like a snake swallowing a mouse. The environment itself is actively pushing you down, crushing your escape routes, forcing you deeper into the digestive tract.
It is.
It is horrifying to imagine metal, cold, rigid steel behaving like a rippling esophagus.
It fundamentally attacks the human understanding of spatial reality. We assume, as a basic rule of survival and sanity, that physical space is a constant. A hallway is a hallway. A steel beam is a solid object that requires immense industrial force to move.
Right. Buildings don't just change shape.
When a location actively participates in the hunt, it is not just locking doors to trap you, it is fundamentally altering reality to break down your psychological defenses.
Breaking their minds before their bodies.
Exactly. The geometric dead ends are the ship mechanically digesting the crew's sanity and their sense of navigational direction before it physically consumes their bodies. It induces absolute, paralyzing disorientation.
Think about the last time you were completely disoriented in the dark. Now imagine trying to run out of your house because there's an intruder, but as you run down the hallway, the walls start rippling. The hallway just keeps getting longer and longer, stretching like taffy.
A waking nightmare.
And when you finally reach the front door, the handle melts seamlessly into a solid wall of drywall. How much of our safety relies on the simple, unspoken assumption that physical space won't betray us?
It is the complete collapse of navigational logic. You cannot mentally map an environment that is dynamically, maliciously hostile. You are fighting an enemy that is the very floor you are standing on.
But incredibly, against all mathematical odds, one person did manage to break through the shifting geometry.
A junior crew member.
Yeah, the one whose audio log we've been following. He acts on pure adrenaline. He breaks away from the encroaching horde of smiling entities. He navigates the peristalsis of the shifting corridors, squeezing through warping bulkheads, and he makes it to the upper levels.
A momentary triumph.
He throws his entire body weight against the heavy, rusted steel latches of the main exit, pushing open the heavy exterior bulkhead door. He's expecting to feel the freezing open air of the main deck. He's expecting to see the dead ocean and his own ship's floodlights waiting for him in the dark.
But the sanctuary of the outside world is denied. What he finds outside is vastly worse than the mutating steel inside.
He pushes the heavy door open, and there is no water. There is no horizon. There are no stars in the sky. The ocean has completely vanished.
Completely gone.
The door simply opens out into an absolute, featureless, infinite black void.
This is the absolute apex of the trap. The theoretical physics concept mentioned in the appended papers to describe this exact phenomenon is an abyssal shift.
Let's define that, because it's just staggering. You fought your way through the monster's literal digestive tract, you pry open the heavy iron jaws to escape into the night, and you realize the rest of the universe has been deleted.
It's a profound conceptual horror.
It's like pulling the plug on reality itself. How does an abyssal shift actually work?
In quantum mechanics and the theoretical models provided, an abyssal shift refers to the creation of a localized pocket dimension. The object, in this case the massive cargo ship, has physically detached from standard reality.
Just cut the cord completely.
Exactly. It folds space-time around its hull, severing all dimensional ties to the ocean, the Earth, and our universe. It is now existing within a localized, self-contained pocket of space, completely severed from the world it left behind.
But I have to push back on this again. Why go through all that insane cosmic effort? If you are a predator and you've already got the prey trapped deep in a maze of shifting steel, heavily outnumbered by your smiling drones,
Yes.
why expend the immense energy required to detach from the fabric of reality? Isn't the heavy steel door enough?
Normally, yes. But we are dealing with an apex entity striving for perfection. Detaching from reality guarantees a mathematically perfect 100% success rate for the hunt.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's look at the variables. If the ship remains in standard reality floating on the ocean, there is always a statistical probability, however infinitesimal, of the prey escaping. A porthole window could be broken, a distress flare could be fired through a vent. The prey's original ship could realize something is wrong and launch a secondary, heavily armed rescue team.
I could call it a military strike.
Exactly. The human element introduces chaos. But by initiating the abyssal shift, the ship effectively quarantines its prey on a cosmic level. The transcript's theoretical notes point out that physical departure from the vessel becomes mathematically impossible.
Because there's nowhere to go.
Why? Because there's literally no destination to escape to. Think about the philosophy of movement. Navigation fundamentally requires 2 points in space, where you're currently located and where you are going.
No amount of navigation can overcome the absence of a destination. That specific line from the transcript gave me absolute chills.
It summarizes the horror perfectly.
If you jump out the door, you aren't falling into water. You are falling into non-existence. It's the ultimate inescapable closed system.
Exactly right. Escaping the ship means stepping into a void that does not support matter. The void acts as the final, impenetrable conceptual barrier of the stomach wall. The ship doesn't need to lock the front door, it just removes the universe on the other side.
So staring out into a mathematical impossibility, an absolute void that breaks the human mind, the junior crew member realizes there's nowhere to go but back inside. And inside, the assimilation process is already wrapping up.
He has no choice but to turn around.
He turns back to face the interior of the ship, and the hallway behind him is now packed, wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder, with those unmoving, smiling entities. They aren't rushing him, they are just quietly blocking any return to the lower decks.
The Horde isn't attacking because aggression is no longer necessary. It's simply waiting for the psychological collapse of the prey.
And stepping out from the front of this silent, smiling crowd is his own captain.
A devastating reveal.
The man he just watched completely panic and fire his weapon a few minutes earlier in the dark. But the panic is completely gone now. The captain is standing perfectly still, his posture completely relaxed, arms at his sides, and his face is locked into that exact same vacant, unnatural, muscle-stretching smile as all the others.
The assimilation was incredibly fast.
And the captain looks directly at the junior crew member, doesn't blink, and calmly states, "We are part of the crew now."
The biological and psychological processing is complete. The text states explicitly that the captain's original consciousness has been overwritten.
Just wiped clean.
His physical form has been annexed to serve as a literal operational component of the ship's internal biological systems.
It is absolutely chilling. The instant, seamless transformation. The fact that the ship doesn't just kill you, it doesn't just dissolve you for raw nutrients like a normal terrestrial predator would. It uses your mind and your body as a literal engine part to keep itself running.
And this brings us to the final and perhaps most terrifying piece of evidence from the source material, the cyclical flowchart of the Phantom vessel. The document describes the ship as an eternal engine.
Right, let's look at this flowchart closely because it outlines the entire life cycle of this organism. It operates in 3 distinct, never-ending phases. Phase 1 is the drift phase. The ship sits in the dead ocean, suppressing kinetic energy, projecting a pristine exterior, and utilizing a fake automated distress signal as a lure.
Waiting for the prey.
Phase 2 is the rescue phase. This is the trap springing, the prey crosses the threshold, the physical doors lock, the internal geometry shifts via peristalsis, and the ship captures new biological material, forcing them into the lower decks.
And then the final stage.
Right. Phase 3 is the assimilation phase, converting the terrified rescuers into the very crew that will physically maintain the ship.
And the crucial, horrifying detail of the assimilation phase is that this newly converted crew generates the specific fuel required to loop the ship back into Phase 1, the drift phase. It is a perfectly closed loop.
But wait, I have to challenge this based on the physics papers we just discussed. Thermodynamics dictates that a perfectly closed loop, a perpetual motion machine, is impossible. Energy is always lost in a system, usually as heat.
That's a solid point.
How is this ship maintaining its energy cycle, shifting dimensions, bending steel, without an external fuel source besides the occasional rescue crew? A dozen humans don't contain enough caloric energy to power a cargo ship, let alone dimension hop.
That is an excellent observation, and the theoretical notes provide a deeply sinister answer. The energy isn't derived from the caloric breakdown of their flesh. The ship isn't burning them like coal.
Then what is it burning?
The energy is extracted from the process of assimilation itself. The sheer psychological trauma, the kinetic energy of their terror, and the quantum energy released when a human consciousness is violently overwritten and subjugated. That is the fuel.
Oh my God.
It consumes their reality to power its own.
Oh, wow. So the ultimate revelation here is that the cargo vessel was never actually lost in the traditional sense. It didn't suffer a maritime tragedy or a rogue wave.
No, it wasn't a victim of the sea.
By digesting the rescue team, breaking their minds, and converting their bodies into its own operational workforce, this self-sustaining interdimensional predator has simply finished its latest feeding cycle. Its fuel tanks are full of human consciousness, and it just continues to sail.
The brilliance of this organism is its terrifying cold efficiency.
Mm.
If we think about evolutionary apex predators on Earth, they must adapt to their specific environments. The ocean is vast, empty, and finding adequate prey can take massive amounts of energy.
Right, it's hard to find food out there.
So this predator evolved to weaponize human civilization itself. It uses human maritime laws, the fundamental codified duty to respond to distress calls, to ensure an infinite self-delivering food supply.
We always view technology and nature as two completely separate domains, you know? A machine is built in a factory, an animal is born in the wild, but this blurs the line so heavily it erases it.
It does, it fuses them.
What happens when a machine, an artificial steel structure, evolves the predatory instincts of a deep-sea animal? It creates a trap that human logic simply cannot process until it's too late.
It uses the best parts of our own civilization against us. Our advanced ships, our long-range radio signals, our deep-seated empathy, our rigid spatial reasoning. Everything that makes us effective navigators, everything that makes us good rescuers, is completely inverted to facilitate our own consumption.
It's time to bring this all together. We've journeyed from a physically impossible, dead, silent ocean, staring at a pristine ship serving as a massive anglerfish lure.
The perfect bait.
We walked past the psychological trap of untouched meals into the deep, groaning stomach of a vessel where the very steel hallways mutated like an esophagus to crush the concept of escape. We looked out of the front door into an abyssal void where our universe had been deleted just to keep us trapped.
A mathematical prison.
And finally, we faced the dark realization of the Eternal Engine, a predator that doesn't just eat you, but annexes your body and mind to keep its phantom cycle turning forever.
A masterpiece of predatory design, operating on a scale that completely humbles human engineering.
So, to you, the listener, the next time you are out in the dark, whether it's on a water, on a lonely road, or anywhere isolated, and you hear a desperate call for help from the shadows,
You might want to pause.
you might want to consider whether you are actually the rescuer or if you are just the next meal walking willingly into the stomach.
And if we look closely at the text one last time, there is one final implication that isn't explicitly spelled out, but it lingers heavily over the entire analysis of that final flowchart.
Well, what did we miss?
Well, we discussed how the ship overwrites consciousness to use humans as operational components, generating quantum fuel from them. But fuel requires continuous energy. It requires friction.
Right.
If the bodies of the crew were just dead, mindless drones, empty husks, they wouldn't produce continuous energy. This heavily implies that those vacant, grinning entities blocking the hallway,
Oh, no, you mean?
they aren't dead. Their original consciousness might not be completely deleted or erased. It might just be suppressed, pushed down, trapped silently inside their own smiling bodies, fully aware of their surroundings, but completely physically paralyzed as their flesh is forced to actively participate in hunting the next rescue team for all of eternity. That unnatural smile isn't just an illusion of safety to lure you in. It's a permanent flesh and bone cage for a screaming mind.
Oh, that horrifying thought is going to stay with me for a very long time. It fundamentally changes how I'll view every empty space from now on. Thank you, everyone listening, for joining us on this deep dive into the absolute darkest corners of the source material. We'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious, question your assumptions, and stay safe.